Hey everyone, Chris Lopez here, and welcome to our third house hacking virtual mastermind. This is a continuation of the idea we had months ago. COVID hit, screwed things up doing it in person, so we've pivoted going to virtual the best we can. And so we got a couple of people here in the studio with us. So I've got myself and my two co-hosts. So first co-host is Ben Einsbar. You guys know he's actively house hacking with a mother-in-law suite in Arvada. Do a lot of Airbnb stuff. Ben, glad to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Excited for this third podcast.
I know it's going to be good. Second co-host here is Jeff White, who's on house hack number 4 now, right? Yeah, man. He's got to break the record here from Joe Massey eventually. Jeff, glad to have you here in the studio, man.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here, and I'm super pumped to talk a little house hacking today.
Yeah, so we're going to hopefully keep it loose, keep it fun, and go into some good details. So, going to go through our guest here in no particular order, but our first guest is Kevin Mayne. Kevin never spent too much time in one place and always hated the idea of paying rent since he was never home. So while he was aware of house hacking, COVID gave him the time to do some more in-depth research. So he realized that not only was that an attainable goal, but also a prudent one after that. So he plans to pursue his real estate investing full-time. Kevin, glad to have you on here, man.
Hey guys, really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Our next guest is Noel, and Noel originally planned to buy a single-family home to live in for a few years and then ultimately turn it into a rental. And that changed after learning what financial independence could really mean for her future. She thought it was not possible, but now with house hack number 1 underway and closing soon, she realizes how wrong she was. Noel, how's it going?
Hi, good. Glad to be here.
Yes, glad to have you here. And then Patrick purchased his first house hack about a year and a half ago, and he's currently closing on a second house hack, and that's tomorrow, right, Patrick?
That is tomorrow, yeah.
So house hack number 2 closes tomorrow, and so he believes house hacking is one of the best ways to build wealth, and he recently started writing about his wealth building journey at examinedwealth.com, which we need to talk about eventually too, Patrick. How are you doing, man?
I'm well, thanks. Really excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course, and last but not least is Vasily. He moved to Denver just a few months ago, and after living in Seattle for 4 years for his tech gig, he fell in love with Denver, and I'm guessing the sunny skies out here. So he bought his first house hack very quickly his first house hack in September, which was a duplex. So he's going to house hack it with the plans of nomading his ways to financial independence. So he became interested in investing and house hacking after getting plugged into Bigger Pockets and the Choose FI podcast a few years ago. And as I said, the rest is history. Vasily, glad to have you here, man.
Thanks, Chris. I'm excited to be here.
All right. So I did the intros, Ben. I lost the agenda. What are we starting with? I told you I'm going to throw you some curveballs, man.
Oh, perfect. So after the second mastermind, we talk about let's switch things up. So I definitely wanted to do that. And one thing that I love hearing about is everyone has their own why for house hacking, right? Everyone has their own reasons. Jeff, I'm sure when you first developed and you came up with house hacking, you had a reason and a purpose and an end goal in mind, right?
Yes.
And that's what I like here. And actually, even as you go through, it can change and it can develop as you go and as you get further down the road. And that's one thing I wanted to start off and just informally talk about if you just tell us about some of your short-term, your long-term goals, and maybe just your why and how you found out about house hacking. Kevin, you mind starting us up, man?
Yeah, sounds good. I'll try not to spend too much time talking about this because I feel like you could go on forever. But yeah, I mean, ultimately the goal is, I think everybody agrees, is financial independence. And, for me, like it said in the intro, I've always hated paying rent. Like it always felt like a waste of money. And I've always thought about how to get away from doing that. And so, house hacking was just kind of the obvious answer of being able to have somebody else basically, pay down a mortgage for you. And, I guess short term, it's to live for free and then long term use these properties to supplement other retirement accounts, whatever it may be, but be able to kind of wake up in the morning and do what I want to do for that day, rather than be working a job that I hate for 30 years, right? So that's kind of the short term and long term, and I didn't realize when I started on this journey kind of how interested and dare I say passionate about real estate I would become doing all the research and everything. So it's been a really cool journey, and I'm excited to continue.
Do you have a number in mind?
A number as far as
house hacks?
Oh man, I don't. We'll see. I'm hoping to have number 2 by next summer, and then see where we go after that. Also trying to get my girlfriend on board, but it's a tougher pitch for her. So we'll see if we can swing that one. Maybe another 1 or 2.
You should definitely have him talk to Patrick and Noel. Have her talk to Patrick and Noel.
Yes.
I know that was interesting to hear about. I need some more people to get on the convincing train here.
I was in her camp too. I feel ya.
Yeah.
Hey,
I think she's coming around.
No, take it away. Help convince her and the old Allison's out there, which is Ben's wife.
Yeah.
And tell us about your guys' goals. And you and Patrick we've talked some really detailed goals. So give us some background and some tips as to why the significant other should get on board.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it wasn't that I wasn't on board. I think I just had a slower progression. So when I thought about having a ton of debt and a ton of houses to manage, I was like, this is going to be very difficult. And how are we ever going to have enough money to be able to do this in the first place? And that's when I met Patrick, and Patrick was like, well, you do this thing called house hacking. And I'm like, what is this thing you call house hacking? And long story short, our goal is hopefully to get to 10 or so properties. We want to pay those down so that we do have financial independence. Our plan, and it's not for everyone, but like ultimately we want a family and we want to be able to spend time with that family. And so being able to, to Kevin's point, wake up and not have to worry about going to a 9-to-5 and be able to be intentional about where you spend your time is something that we definitely want for our future. And sorry, Patrick, I'm definitely speaking for you, but you can chime in. But yeah, and house hacking was a perfect way to be able to do that because we're not paying a ton in rent. I mean, we're not living rent free, so I envy you, but hopefully we will be living rent free, and hopefully we'll have properties that are paying not only for our primary mortgage, but supplementing our income so that time that we have is, like I said, the intentional time that we can spend. But yeah, it was hard to get on board at first just because it's hard to think about the amount of money that you put in a down payment on 10 properties. But the beauty about house hacking is you're not putting 20% down on a rental. You're able to go and live in a property, gain those, spend less money, and then have someone else pay the mortgage down. So you're almost getting free assets, or you're getting them at a significant discount.
Yeah, and one thing that caught my mind is you said you're not necessarily living for free. Do you still feel like that's a win, even though it's not covering your full mortgage, but you're living for cheaper? Do you still think that that's a win in your book?
Oh yeah, I mean, or else I wouldn't be closing on a house hack in 2 weeks. All of that happened within the past year of saving up in the house hack that Patrick currently has. So if it wasn't for that and living very significantly discounted, there's no way I would have been able to save that money.
The best part of all that too is even if you don't live for free, or you're paying $500, $1,000, you're living in a property that you own, and you get all the tax benefits, depreciation, right off the interest, pretty much right off the majority of the property. So you're getting all these benefits. So really, even if you're paying $500, $700 to live there, you're pretty much getting the great benefit of an asset you own. And then long term, when you move out, then eventually you'll start cash flowing that property and getting more of the cash flow benefits that everyone wants. But when you live there, sometimes it's a compromise between sacrificing, something, privacy versus nice place or nice areas, and you have to kind of weigh each of those factors until you find what works best for you. And
it's still cheaper than renting a room in Denver.
Correct.
I mean, what are you renting your places for?
$750 a room.
Yeah.
So.
And what's a standard 1-bedroom, 1-bath studio go for?
More expensive than that. I know, there's a comma in there.
Yeah.
So I'll speak for Patrick. He was a great boyfriend and was smiling and nodding the whole time there. Right, Patrick? In all seriousness, actually spend a second, Patrick, and talk about the Examined Wealth you're launching, because I think that's really interesting. We were trading some emails about this last week. I think you're doing a really good job in documenting your journey. Plus, your background is in doing some technology and educational stuff. So you know how to kind of like really help convey and teach people. So give me and people the background what you're doing.
Sure. Yeah, I'll try to tie that into what we're talking about here. So I started off my career as a teacher, and I had a very low income, and I knew that inevitably, in order to live a life that I wanted to live, I would need to figure out ways to subsidize that income elsewhere. And so that got me started in trying to figure out different side hustles and led me to the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, as I'm sure most people on the call have read. And that was a big aha moment for me. And so ever since reading that book and a few other real estate books early on in my career, I was just like set on real estate. But I was financially far further away from that than I thought I would be. And so in the back of my mind, I was like, all right, one day I'll have like 300 doors and it'll be awesome. And I had these like super lofty abstract goals just because I wanted to go big. But I think that over the years and getting, closer to, well, actually A, having real estate now, and B, continuing that journey, I look at like what Noelle and I are building and the life that we want to have together and build long-term. And we like to play hard. Like we like to work hard, but then on the weekends, we're like outdoors as much as possible, whether it's hiking, camping, backpacking, rafting, skiing. And, as she mentioned with the family component, like those are things we want to build our lives around long-term. And so I think in the past like year and a half or so, my internal script has flipped from like, I want 300 doors to I want enough real estate that provides respectable cash flow that we can live off of, but not be like this mammoth of a business that we have to run and manage and take time away from the things that are truly important in life. And so that has really helped guided certain decisions in the past handful of months. And, it's something that I personally want to continue exploring. And so the whole concept behind Examined Wealth is that there are two types of wealth that you have in your life: personal wealth and financial wealth. And personal wealth, like our time and our relationships and experiences, are the things that we really live for. And when I hear a lot of people talking about building their financial wealth, it's like with the end goal that I have to have a certain amount of financial wealth in order to do these things that bring me personal wealth. And in my mind, that's kind of like putting the cart before the horse. And so I am just trying to raise awareness around the notion that prioritize your personal wealth along the journey of building financial wealth. And then there are certain tactics and strategies you can use to build your financial wealth that can align with the way you live your personal wealth now, so that you don't feel like you're putting off your fulfillment, for 10 years from now when you really could have it today.
Well said. And one thing I can relate to, you were talking about there, Patrick, just starting off with, hey, the goals, I want, 300 doors or 500 doors or whatever. I can't remember mine, but I had similar, very lofty goals, to use that good phrase. But then once you kind of realize, hey, if I have, 8 paid off properties, 10 paid off properties, 12 paid off properties, I actually meet what I need, live the lifestyle I want, and still be able to work towards, bigger numbers, it becomes a lot more attainable. Actually, I can do that. Versus 300 doors, It's that's a lot harder to do than buying 10 properties or 12 properties, whatever it is. So, great, man. All right, last but not least, Vasily. What's up? Tell us, everyone, just kind of your longer term goals and things like that, because we know you got into real estate investing from Bigger Pockets and the Choose FI podcast, which is, you're not the only person to get into real estate investing from those podcasts. What are your long term goals?
Sure. Quickly before that, I think it's funny how Noelle brought up the weirdness of the term house hacking. I initially thought that it was like a hacker connecting to a house and trying to hack its security system. So I'm definitely with you there. But yeah, it's
That's great.
I'm a software engineer, so I was kind of biased towards that definition. But yeah, I want to echo a lot of this stuff that everybody has said so far. I kind of realized that the 9 to 5 was not for me. I want to eventually start my own business and be financially independent and not really depend on a constant paycheck to paycheck. And then being a numbers guy, I realized how the numbers just look amazing when you're looking at real estate, especially house hacking. And so it's kind of eye-popping. So I started with, choose a FI and, investing in index funds and whatnot. But then I realized that real estate is just a great way to diversify. And that's how I got interested in that. But to answer your question, yeah, so my long-term goal is definitely to become financially independent enough that I can focus on my passion. And this is really aligns with what Patrick was saying. I want to focus on my personal wealth, because at the end of the day, it's your financial wealth. It should support that personal wealth. And I want to work on something I'm passionate about and start a small business. And I'm not sure what that is, but we'll see. And but for now, my short-term goal is to acquire 5 properties, and then we'll see where that goes.
Great. And this is something we had talked about, as Ben mentioned, as we, we're, doing virtual stuff. As everyone knows, it's weird right now with COVID and nothing like, all being around the same room like it was pre-COVID. But, the Denver investing community, believe it or not, it's really small. The house hacking community is even a smaller slice of that pie. So we want to spend some more time kind of getting to know, other investors, other house hackers, and trying to help other people network, because you can't track on a spreadsheet. But just like your network, whether that's for help on resources or contractors or ideas, or, hey, I got this weird situation, or deals, like it has such a big impact on your career in real estate investing, way more than index funds, the stock market. That your network doesn't matter. But when it comes to like real estate investing in businesses, huge impact on there. So we want to help really get people knowing each other around the community, have them back on future podcasts where they feature house hack Mastermind podcast, or individual episodes talking about their specific house hacks and their goals. So just spend some time. So everyone's, contact details, names will be in the show notes. Please connect with them. Please grab a virtual beer or beer one day, whatever it is, like network. It's great. It's a great way to go.
So you mentioned networking, Kevin. We talked on the phone a couple weeks ago before the podcast, and we talked about networking. Tell me what your thoughts were about networking, let's say 2 years ago.
Yeah. It's funny because I was flashing back to that conversation as well when Chris was bringing that up. So
that would be good.
Yeah, a little bit more about my background. The first probably 8 or 9 years of my life post-college, I was working seasonal jobs. I graduated with a natural resources degree, so I was doing trail work, spent some time up in Alaska as a fishing guide, like never had stepped foot in an office, right, until I was probably 30 years old. And then recently, within the last 2.5 years, I got a quote unquote real job. And part of that was to network. And I had all these friends that were networking, when we were out of college and stuff. And I just thought it was such a fake, like horrible thing that people have to do. And I went to a few networking events for the company that I worked for, and it was miserable. I hated it. And then, I started getting into real estate, and even just looking at deals and talking to different agents or, whatever it may be. And all of a sudden I was like, man, this is actually pretty great. Like I want to talk to these people. There's this it's more than a common interest. It's like this common bond, I think, that everybody in this little world shares. And it makes it feel so much more genuine and authentic, which to me is, very important. And so, yeah, I mean, now, that's why I reached out about the podcast. I never would have done this probably on any other topic that I can think of, but all of a sudden I'm here discussing with you guys kind of what's going on in my life and hearing about what's going on in yours, and really excited to be doing that. So, yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to finding what you're interested in. And, if you're having to do something for the wrong reasons, it's never going to feel as good as doing it for the right reasons. So, yeah, I mean, and Chris, to circle back to your original point, like, I think relationships in this world, from my limited experience, are extremely important. And if you can find good people to work with, it's, that's crucial, I think, to success, and it just adds value in your life in other areas as well.
Well said. Well said.
So, Ben, you got the list of questions somewhere, right? Or do I have those?
I got them right here.
All right.
Thank you for printing them out.
Oh, they're on the back of the page. Huh?
Yeah, double-sided.
Yeah.
All right. So let's move on to some of the questions that you guys submitted beforehand. The first one, and forgive me, I don't remember who was tied to what question, but we can open up for conversation, is when having multiple house hacks. There's actually, it's cool because now we have a couple people that are diving into their second, or in Jeff's case, 4 house hacks. How much should you have in reserve for each property?
And that was Patrick.
That was Patrick?
Right, that was you, Patrick, right?
Yeah, I threw that one out there. And it's
what's
been
your
funny
current
because,
thought process on there?
Well, so it's changed a little bit since COVID, because I was talking with this about this with Noel one day, and I was talking about, like, okay, getting into a second house hack. I'm thinking about, like, how much money I should have on hand in cash as an emergency fund, just in case I need to replace a water heater, or someone doesn't pay their rent, or whatever the case is. And we were just kind of like talking about different formulas and ways to calculate it. And I think that in that conversation, I was being I was erring on the smaller side of funds, and Noel was erring on the larger side of funds. And I made the comment, like, yeah, but let's say you have 10 properties, like, what are the chances that something happens in the world and suddenly, like, people stop, like, all of your tenants stop paying because something happened in the world. I was like, the chance of that happening is so slim. More or less, you will always have tenants in your properties, and there will just be, like, rolling vacancies that pop up here and there. And then it probably wasn't more than, like, a month or so later that COVID hit. And I was like, okay, case in point. And Noah was like, yeah, remember that discussion we had the other month? So yeah, it's just been something that I've been thinking a little bit more about recently as I close on number 2 tomorrow. And we talked with Jeff a couple of weeks ago just about it, and threw some ideas around. But I think the number that I'm going to go with is basically having 6 months of expenses, including the mortgage, per property on hand. Just to have that is probably on the slightly more conservative side, but given everything going on right now with COVID and the rent extensions and things like that, I think I would just rather err on having more cash on hand, and then as COVID starts to subside, reevaluate.
So I agree. One thing I've learned, and I think I'm probably the oldest person on the call here by a couple years, is a 2008, 2006 meltdown. No one back then and since that I've ever heard has complained about having too much cash in the bank.
Yeah.
And I mean, people complain, oh, I'm not making money on there. Good problem to have, but no one's ever complained about having too much money in the bank when shit hits the fan.
The what ifs. The what ifs.
And I always agree. I'm going to ask you this question next week, because I agree with, like, your thought process here, Patrick. I always kind of go like, hey, what's the, I'm always going to be like, hey, what's the low probability event that's going to wipe things out? Okay, cool. Like a year sucks. You have to replace a water heater in year 2 versus year 10, like $1,000. If that makes or breaks someone in real estate, you should not be investing in real estate. But hey, what's that low probability event that can wipe you out? But then where's that fine balance of things? Jeff, your background is definitely finances. You've got 4 house hacks, and I know doing more. What's your thought process on that?
Yeah, you gotta just pretty much factor it in like what Patrick, you were doing with Noel. You have to think of, it's all about risk, right? Like a lot of whatever tenants you decide to fill your properties, some of them will lose their jobs, some will get reduced hours, some will get laid off. Like I've had, I think I heard in your podcast from one property manager, someone they lost their job the day after they moved in.
Yep.
So you got to plan for things like that could happen, especially right now, or people even in white collar jobs where you think they're more safer than service jobs, but that's not necessarily the case. So just put it into your numbers. Like I even have like a spreadsheet where I do probabilities. Like, okay, if I got 50% rents from all my tenants, how would it look? If I got 0% rents from my tenants that rent out the whole units, how would that look? And just doing different scenarios where it's like worst case, best case, and medium case, and then just seeing, okay, like if it was worst case and 60% of my tenants just lost their jobs, there's no rent assistance, no unemployment they can get, how long until I deplete my cash reserves? And then medium case is like, okay, well, let's do different scenarios, like 50% of people, making their full payment, and the other 25% making 75, and the other 25 making 50. And then seeing kind of, okay, where's that at? Like, am I still positive? That's why I always look at, okay, how much for each property. For me personally, I like to see $1,000 over the mortgage. But I know that's not possible for every house hack. Sometimes you're right on that. Especially when you're living there, you're going to be probably break even or paying a little bit. But $1,000 is my target number, just because I know gives me more security. Like, okay, if that worst case happens, I have some room to work with. Even at the 50% rent level, I could survive another 18 months with my cash reserves for each of these properties. But yeah, just play around with different scenario. Not like
so you actually ran those stress tests?
Yeah, the different scenarios. And actually some of them, when COVID first hit, I got a call literally, or when they locked down everything, one of my biggest tenants that has a 3-bed, 1-bath, two of the three adults that lived there lost their jobs like the next day. And they somehow still came up with the full rent that month, actually, or the next month. And then the following months, I gave them, they paid 75% rent somehow. They somehow made it work. They found a way. And now they got their job back about a couple months ago. But sometimes you got to just be flexible too. You got to, like, for me, it's a people business too. You can't, I know some property managers do payment plans and very, hardcore, like, okay, you're going to pay this full rent back, but I'm more realistic, and people lose their jobs. People working in restaurants, especially bars, restaurants, it's really tough. Like, imagine having a job where you're making good money, then nothing, and then you're laid off, and then you're working whatever 8 hours here, 10 hours there, and you sometimes just have to be flexible. And that's another reason why I like mixing renting by the room and whole unit rentals, because renting by the room, it's a lot easier to make $700 rent payment versus $2,000 for like a whole space, or $1,500. So it gives you a little more leeway with people. So just some things to think about, because you'll eventually adapt what strategy works best for you. And it's all about, you're not going to eliminate the risk, but you'll minimize the risk to your satisfaction. And that's, I think, the key thing for everyone's goals here is what will get you comfortable. You could increase your cash reserves. You could, maybe do rent by the room to get a little more cash flow and spread out. And maybe it's a little more property management intensive, and you have to do more work than you want. But maybe in the next 6-12 months, or however long this lasts, it might be worth it.
So let me ask you this. So for some rules of thumb for guidance,
Yeah.
like what would you tell people out there? Because I agree with what you said,
Yeah.
but for someone that's, a couple years behind where you're at, it's hard for them to plan that stuff. And you have a much stronger financial background than a lot of people do.
Yes.
Like what's a rule of thumb? Is it
Sure.
$10,000 per property?
Yeah, I
an
would say
account, or what do
if you
say?
have a property built, most house hacks are 1960s, 70s, and some of them are updated, some are not. Some have new. If your place is fully updated, brand new build, or like every major water heater, furnace, AC unit, dishwasher, all the appliances are brand new, you won't have to repair things as much. But I've had even water heaters that are 2 years old go out on me. So there's no guarantee just because it's brand new, things won't happen. I've had everything go out, furnace goes out. I've had, and you just have to plan that. That's just going to happen. People will damage things. Door jams will break. I would say the big thing for a hard and fast rule, though, answer your question, is for a property that's just your generic 1970s, kind of updated, kind of newer stuff, but not everything's not super old. And I would say, at least 10,000 per property to give you some leeway, just because things will happen. Like a tree will get struck by lightning and hit your roof. The gutters will you'll be surprised on what tenants will break.
And it always happens right after you buy the property.
Yeah. Or right after you get like a new furnace, and then the water heater goes out. So things like that will happen, and your tenants, they're not, and sometimes they don't tell you for they'll take cold showers for like a month. I had a tenant that did that. I was like, you could have told me, I would have fixed this water heater. I had to send someone out, but sometimes they don't tell you. That's another thing to have good relationships with. Going back to the people business, having really good relationships with your tenants, because you don't want them to not tell you when there's leaks or something wrong, or the furnace goes out and it's like Christmas Eve. I had that. That was my oh crap moment. Like, better get someone out there. But luckily, I had a good relationship with that tenant, and they let me know, and I got someone out there, because you don't want people to freeze or worry or have space heaters too. I recommend that. Sometimes things happen, and you can't get someone out there right away, and it's 5 degrees outside and snowing.
Yeah.
I love how you said it's a people business. I agree with that 100%. But we're trying to pivot a little bit. We're talking we've been talking about the tenants losing their job, people paying your mortgage losing their job. What about your risk tolerance for your personal job as well? I think that's something to definitely take into mind as well. If you're in, let's say, sales or something that's based off of it's not a consistent income. So if you have an inconsistent income, then you definitely want to have much more reserves versus if you have a W-2 job where it's a little bit more stable and it's a consistent income that you can base it off of. But I have a couple rentals in out of state and then one house hack here, but my rule of thumb is 4 to 6 months per door. And then for my wife and I, this is just the oh shit fund. We always talk about the oh shit, because those happen when you don't want to, when you're not expecting it. And that's about, I'd say about extra 20,000, just because you never know what will happen.
Yeah. My overall really rule of thumb, I'm talking about the risk tolerance. I'm an agent. We're 100% commission based. Mm-hmm. And then rentals, all that. Because I learned my financial lessons of keeping a lot more cash in the bank in 2008. So that's why I'm a grandma broken record on this topic now. Is to be able to, if everything went to zero, everything could live for 1 year. That's like my very simple fund for everything. Just hey, if everything I lose, I go to zero. My wife's a W-2 job, she goes to zero. Everyone stops paying. We could survive everything for 1 year. That's my rule of thumb. And I'd be curious. We don't have to get the exact numbers out here, but I think it's just so important. go around the panel here and give everyone's kind of like their rules of thumbs are, since we got people buying House Act 1, House Act 2, and so on. So Vasily, what's your kind of like reserve plan for your, you're buying your first House Act, and next year you'll be on Nomad number 2. Like, what's your plan?
Yeah, so like you were saying before, I started off with ChooseFi, so I've been, hearing a lot of advice about that even before I got into real estate. And I like how you say 1 year, because a lot of the advice out there is like 3 months, which I don't think that's enough, especially now COVID. Like, look at how long it's been happening for. So yeah, my plan is to always have liquid funds for myself, and also for for each property I plan to own. I don't have a specific value, but I think it's good to calculate it in terms of time. So I'd say 6 months for me is like a comfortable cushion. I'm lucky in that I'm in an industry in tech that I don't have to worry too much about job safety. But I definitely am cognizant of the fact that my tenants might not have that job safety. So I'd say 6 months for myself, and probably something like $10,000 per door.
Cool. And let me ask this, because since you're into the 5 movement, I know a couple of you guys are, but I'm loosely into it, but not hardcore, I'd say. For you and everyone else, are you guys keeping anything cash in the bank, or is it cash in the bank and throwing some in the stock market? Because I know that's a common theme I've heard is, oh yeah, cash and then throw a bunch in the stock market as well. So are you planning on keeping stuff? You said, because you said liquid. Liquid could be cash in the bank or the stock market.
Yeah. So I'm a nerd. I have a lot of spreadsheets about this, and I divided by liquid, semi-liquid, and then like quasi-solid. So I consider my stocks and index funds semi-liquid, especially if I've been buying some. You don't want to resell stuff before a year has passed, because then you're looking at short-term capital gains. And so that's something to consider. But I definitely have a bunch of quite old, stock investments that I can pull from. And then you also have to consider your, 401k, Roth IRA. Those are their worst case scenario. You don't want to touch them, but they are there and they can give you peace of mind. You will pay a certain penalty in some cases. And then stuff that's completely solid, it's your equity in your real estate. Like, that's really difficult to pull out unless you refi or something like that. So I kind of break it down into buckets and make sure I have enough in each bucket.
But here's always the thing to keep in mind is if things really get that bad and you're in that dire situation and you need the money, banks won't lend you the money. There's that, I forget the catchphrase for that, but like, oh, I need to refund to pay stuff. The bank's like, we're not lending you money on this right now. Yeah, so it becomes very illiquid. All right, Noelle, what do you want to add on to what Patrick said about your guys' conversation?
Yeah, no, I mean, it was funny because he didn't mention this, but I was the one that brought up what happens if none of your tenants can pay rent for 6 months. Like, what are the chances that happens? And then literally COVID came the next month. No, I mean, our plan. Yeah, I know, right? Oh gosh.
She jinxed it.
I did. Exactly. I'm so sorry. No, but our plan is we have the 2 buckets of 6 months. We have 6 months that we want of emergency funds for our properties to cover mortgage, and then hopefully a little bit of buffer for any like things that go wrong that we need to fix. And then Patrick and I both also have a personal 6 months emergency fund, which covers our living expenses. So those 2 things are separate. We don't combine them, but 6 months based on where we're at financially is the goal that we want to work to get. I think ultimately it'd be great if we could have a year on hand. Also, seeing what happened with the stock market in COVID, personally, I am not one to consider those liquid funds. I don't know about you guys, but all my stocks in retirement tanked in about 2 seconds. So I wouldn't want to rely on those kind of reserves. So we are definitely relying on savings in the bank.
So you're all cash.
Yep.
I like that.
Yeah. All right. Kevin, what about you, man?
Yeah, I think this can be a pretty complicated question. And I think there's a big difference between somebody like myself who purchased their first house hack and then somebody who has multiple properties. So when I went into this, I was thinking about it a lot as just a house for myself, right? And so I ran the numbers just kind of as if I were going to be living there and there were no tenants or rent coming in. And, I think there's also a difference between having a higher risk tolerance and also being reckless, right? And so I bought my house and probably had 3 months reserve where I could cover mortgage. And if something broke, I'd be able to fix it, and counted on the tenants portion as kind of cherry on top, which, side note, is good because there's been some issues with that since the close and COVID and everything. So that's still something we're working through. But I have a pretty aggressive savings rate, and so I've been able to still build savings while having to cover the mortgage payments, and I'm hoping for a windfall with some rental assistance or whatever that comes out to be at the end. But I almost got caught in the trap of I was able to get some grants for the purchase, and so I knew that my purchasing power kind of was boosted by that a little bit, and I started thinking about would it be worth it to push my, I guess, the price range I was looking at to the very high end to try and take advantage of some of these programs, and hopefully that would work out in the long run and have a more expensive asset appreciate more over the next 20-30 years. But I'm glad that I dialed it back and kept it kind of more in the conservative range for this one. But I think it's easier to do that if it's your own personal house as well as your rental. But then once you start thinking about having a pure rental that started as a house hack and then purchasing a second home as well, I think the idea of having, I guess, a bigger cushion for those reserve funds probably becomes a lot more important. But yeah, so I don't know, I didn't have any set numbers. I was comfortable, and I tried to be conservative, and have a few months and enough cash to deal with anything major that were to come up. But yeah, I mean, it's not 10 grand or, I'd probably maybe be in trouble if I lost my job for a year. That would definitely cause some pretty major problems.
Awesome. So we got everyone. Did you share yours, Ben?
Yeah, it was just discussing your risk tolerance on your job.
That's right. You gave your numbers.
Your risk tolerance on that job, but
yeah, and we'll kind of move on to the next question here, but for just anyone out there listening, I know this is a very boring topic, but boring is important in investing, and boring wins in the long run. So pay attention to it. Reach out to anyone on your all have different philosophies, but make sure you have your game plan together and make sure it's written down, you execute on there. And I will stop on that for a few minutes. Mr. Einsbar.
All right.
What is next on the question?
It is Kevin's. He wanted to discuss the value of using a real estate agent that is familiar with house hacking and real estate investing principles. I know when we discussed on the phone, you kind of told me about your current house hack situation. Do you kind of want to touch on that, the background behind this question?
Yeah. And, these are all lessons that I learned in hindsight, as I think most lessons are learned. But basically, yeah, so, I was going through this process. I was looking for a duplex. The realtor that I used was good, but, not focused on investor related properties, I guess. So, trying to find somebody their dream home rather than something that's going to really be a good fit for a house hack. And so, I think, Ben, we had discussed, like, there were tenants that I inherited that were having issues paying rents, for the 2 months before we closed on the property. It was never disclosed. So there's some issues that we're dealing with now on that front. But the bottom line is, I think the whole process I went into a little naively where, I was the one that was looking at these properties and sending them to the realtor, trying to get showings set up. And I realized after the fact that it'd be a lot more efficient and helpful to have somebody with a lot more experience that could quickly identify, if this is truly a good deal or not, kind of identify some of the issues that might not make it a good deal. And on the flip side of that, Chris, I'd be interested to get your opinion on this, but I would assume that somebody that kind of lives in that world of finding investment properties and dealing with people that are looking for that and also that are selling investment properties probably have, some more deals they might be able to find or come across that are off market that might be good for a house hack or, whatever it may be. So I think there's a lot of value that I didn't inherently think about in having a good, and it's not even good, right? It's just different. This is kind of a specialized view on properties. So I think it's more having somebody that's dealt with this and is very experienced in this world could really, really make the process a lot simpler and kind of remove some of the roadblocks that you might face with somebody who's not thinking with that same mindset.
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said, you learn a few lessons there. I mean, so for from our perspective, I mean, we definitely get a lot of clients that reach out to us directly wanting to, hey, we're very clear on, hey, we focus on my current tagline right now is we'll help you build your dream portfolio, not buy your dream home. I realized that really early on that when people want to buy their home, I do not have the patience for them because I'm like, oh, you told me you wanted this. You don't like the color of the bathroom? You can paint the damn bathroom. And it's not very good people skills doing that way, where it's more like when you do the numbers, it's more like, hey, cool, here are the numbers. And investors can generally get past like, okay, they don't care about the paint or they're open to being educated about it. It's a lot less emotional. So the two things I've noticed is that, you will not get, generally speaking, off-market deals by working with like an investor-focused agent for house hacks. Like we definitely see off-market deals. We may have done one off-market house hack this year. I don't actually think we did. I'm trying to remember if we did, just because the off-market stuff is just really tough for an owner-occupant, especially if you're doing like, an owner-occupant for a single family, or if you're doing an FHA for a multifamily, just due to the speed of it and also the quality of the property. Like a lot of times these off-market, they're going to be in poor quality, a lot of times a quicker close. Hard to do, especially for a first-time house hacker, because he's got to, number one, like, does actually work for if you're doing a 30-day close FHA, it's hard to compete against 5 cash offers. Not impossible, but it's hard on off-market world where they're usually looking for another investor coming to just buy cash, not be nitpicky. And plus, especially for like, if you're a first-time house hacker, which usually means a first-time home buyer, there's that learning curve there. I would rather have someone pay $10,000 more in purchase price and understand the process, understand the property versus do a quick closing up being a bad property, because $10,000, $20,000 in a grand scheme for buy and hold doesn't really matter when you talk the numbers. But also we've had our fair share of clients where they've come through and said, I'll work with the agent, and then we couldn't find anything. It was frustrating. So it's all pros and cons in my mind. I would just say, because I know a lot of people for agents, and I'll send it to lenders as well, like, everyone has a sister's friend or a cousin or a buddy or someone that's an agent or a lender. Everyone has that. And don't mean this impersonally. Don't help out your friend. Help out yourself. And I did it for myself with friends in their industries. I'm like, hey, cool, we're buddies, but I need to work with someone else on a niche here. So, I think it's definitely worthwhile. I'm obviously biased on here. But, doing that and understanding the game, because the other thing that people end up doing on, especially that first time home buyers, they get so excited. And I did that myself. My very first house hack I did, my one and only house hack I did, and about 10 years ago, was when I renovated, I way over improved it for a rental. And you get excited, oh, I want to do this. I want to do this. It's like, no, it's a future rental property. Don't worry about this. Like, it does not matter. And we definitely have that conversation frequently with people. It's like, hey, cool, I get it. Let's plug in the spreadsheet, because this right here, it does not matter to your future tenants. And that's how I always look at it.
I think we could go on for this. This could be a whole series on it. But before I answer, so I'm not going on too long. Before I answer a question, I want to pose another question: is for your first house hack, when you're getting ready to do the offers, how many of you had cold feet and were starting to second guess your own self and your numbers? So, awesome. Someone, would you agree?
Yeah, so it's funny how this is very related to the question at hand. Working with a investor friendly agent, because that's exactly what happened to me. I just jumped into it, kind of naively, and then my agents back in Seattle were just showing me whatever, didn't have any Excel sheets, didn't really have calculate any numbers, and the only time they got interested and excited was when I was interested in something that was very expensive, and then I was like, okay, I got the kind of cold feet, and then I started running the numbers. I'm like, I'm going to be bleeding $3,000 per month, even if I occupy all the rooms here in this. It was a quad. So that's when I realized, okay, maybe this is not a good idea. And then later I became much more, focused on finding an agent that's actually specializing in this. And I actually reached out to Chris and his team, and it was night and day, the level of expertise, the level of advice I got. So I think it makes a really huge difference getting an agent that are familiar with investing or do it themselves as well.
And that's exactly what I was getting after. Is I remember Alice and I getting nervous, like, because it seems such an overwhelming process, especially if the house hack that you're getting needs renovations. It's like drinking from a water hose. But when you have an agent that is familiar, because real estate investing is a niche, but then house hacking is a niche within a niche. So they really help you push forward and really focus on the numbers and detach yourself from the emotional side of things, and actually knowing that what it's going to produce and what it's going to do for your future financial position. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in really quick because I have a very similar story on both the agent and the lender side. So before I got this place, which is house hack number one, I had saved up money and found out about Chris online somehow. I forget exactly how, but basically went to him. And in my mind, I was set on getting either duplex or triplex and using my FHA loan. I was like, all right, this is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to do it. I'm ready to roll. So I remember meeting up with Chris and, kind of laying out like what I'd been thinking. And he goes, yeah, that's great. There are no multifamilies in the market right now, and there haven't been for like 8 months. And I was like, oh, all right, this changes things. And,
I remember we walked that one duplex. I think it was in Inglewood. Remember that piece of crap?
Yeah. Yeah. So then Chris brought up the idea of like, one of the ways you can still do this and meet your goals is by looking for a single family home with a mother-in-law suite. And that was an option that I had never even really thought about before. And so he's like, just keep an eye out. We'll keep an eye out together. We'll look for something. So I think it was like the next week or so, we went out one day and saw 2 properties. One was a single family home with a mother-in-law suite, and then the duplex that he just mentioned. And I'm hoping that this goes down in Chris's book as like the fastest deal he's ever done, because I wasn't even pre-qualified and was like, yeah, I like that single family home. And he's like, all right, cool. We'll put an offer on it and see what happens. So it turns out it was already under contract. put a backup offer on it after just seeing the 2 properties, and the backup offer got accepted and went through, and that's what ended up being my first house hack. And then now that I've gone into house hack number 2, similar story to what we were just talking about. We have a friend who is a lender, and I was like, oh, sweet, can get him some business. So ended up going with him initially, but I think that to no fault of him or his firm, they're just much more familiar with traditional single-family homes. And the property that I'm closing on tomorrow has an ADU on it. And so everything was going smoothly, but the appraisal came back, and the appraisal came back really low. And it was to the point where it was just like they weren't able to fund the deal. And so it was at that moment that I was like, okay, that we can either kill the deal or I can go to a different lender. So Joe Massey was the guy that I used for my first house hack. So I went back to Joe, and him and his team are much more familiar with the house hack situation and multifamilies in general. And they were able to get it done in record time. They sent a new appraiser out, rushed it. It actually came in over the offer price, which was stellar because then there's some built-in equity in it. But it was just like wild to see basically like a $90,000 swing in the appraisal price just based off 2 different appraisers. So I think that alone goes to show like the value of working with a team that truly understands investment properties and house hacking properties.
Yeah, and to build on that too, like, I think Patrick and I have been fortunate that Patrick did a lot of research before he got into house hacking, and that's why he reached out to Chris. So we went into the house hack having the documents that Chris shared with us to be able to plug in numbers and understand the cap rate and understand like what we were getting into. So that's why I'm shaking my head. No, we didn't have that question of numbers, is because Patrick did the planning beforehand, and we had the opportunity to be confident in what that was before we went into the deal and had a team to back us up. There have been many times during our search where, Preston has walked in a house and been like, nope, like turn around. This is not the one for you guys. And that knowledge and that type of honesty is invaluable. Like it is totally needed when you're doing something like this. So yeah.
Yeah, I remember Patrick, what you just said, this gave me a flashback the first time we met Patrick. And after, 10 minutes, I was sitting down, I was like, oh, I like this guy because you broke out your laptop with a spreadsheet, everything. I was like, oh, yeah, I like you.
As he's walking
No, when we first just kind of like initial meet and greet meeting.
Yeah.
Because we were talking, I got my spreadsheet, here's my plan, here's numbers. So I was like, all right, good.
Knowing is half the battle.
Yeah. Cool. So I know we're getting close to the hour mark, and I think we got definitely time for one more question here. What's next, Ben?
Well, Jeff, do you want to talk about raising rents or staying unattached from investment properties, so like an ideal home versus a rental home?
The latter is unattached. That's probably more important.
That we can talk about that quickly.
I'll go back.
But the rents right now, let's talk about that too if we have time. So
any house at any property you do rent, you just gotta know, and especially in Denver, the timing. It's all about, especially for Patrick and Noel, since you guys are closing coming up, you just gotta know that it's going to be a little tougher right now because we're approaching Thanksgiving and Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, all the holiday season. And then on top of that, then you have all those cold months. So a lot of people don't move November, December, January, February, and even throw in March too, just because of, I believe that's the snowiest season on average, snowiest month, sorry. So just factor that in to your numbers that you're going to have lower. You probably won't get the rents that you want. You're going to have to probably just get $50 to $100 less, sometimes even more, just depending how soon you want to get it rented. Sometimes it's a question of like, do I want to rent it by December 1st, or do I want to push for this max rent here and wait 3 more months? Because you might get someone that will agree to the higher rent, but is it worth it for your place to sit unoccupied for 2 months? That's the question to think about.
So with the seasonality in rents, do you find that true with the room by room rentals too, as far as like vacancy time and rent them out?
Yeah, like even or with the rent by the room, yeah, I would say right after October 1st. If you're trying to rent by the room, you're going to have also some seasonality. You can still find people, and I have found people in the wintertime. You're just not going to get the 750, 800, 850 per room, unless it's like a super, like if you just rent out like the master and it's like, okay, 800, like unless you go in with maybe you're underpricing what you're getting and you don't know that. But like master rooms with bathrooms, you should get at least 850 to 900. Private rooms are 10 by 12, probably 700 or 750, even in older properties. Basement rooms, probably 650, 700 for just a standard private room, shared bathroom. So those are kind of the ballpark numbers you can work with. But yeah, seasonality definitely factors in. So that 750 room, you're probably looking at 650, 700 for that same room.
Really?
Yeah. Just because there's just not as many people moving. Even millennials, they still move here, but the only ways around it is you're going to have to really push like if you want that 750, you can get it. You're just going to have to really ramp up your marketing. Like you're going to have to pay for Facebook ads. You're going to have to post on Roomster. You're going to have to really maybe reach out to people, be a little more aggressive and not rely on them coming to you. And you might get it, but just don't go in at the realization like, well, if you're not getting 10 to 20 responses right away from your listing, then you're probably priced too high. And that's in the winter time, you're not gonna get as much after October 1st.
So doing the more, proactive, outreach approach and spending some money on, some advertising, in your experience, is always that like you can do it, but is the juice worth the squeeze? Is all the time and money spent, is that worth it to get that extra $50 a month in rent for 6 months? Like if you're renting a place, week after Thanksgiving, would you say, cool, I'll rent it for $75 less than I pro forma and take care of it in the spring? Or would you put the time and money to try to get the 750 mark?
I would just rent it for the lower amount and then put it shorter 6-month lease. And then when it comes up for renewal, either if that person's great, actually, I usually keep people. I have a guy renting a room for $650 right now in a bigger room. He's a great tenant, keeps the place clean, picks up after himself. And I have no reason to raise his rent unless he moves out. And then I'll rent it for market when he moves out. So it really just depends. If you find, to me, great tenants are worth less rent than crappy tenants, and you're getting the max, and they, treat your place like trash, and they don't pick up, like they always cook, they leave their shoes around, they make a big mess. But yeah, just factor. It's all about just, again, going back to scenarios like how soon if you're not getting responses right away from your listing, especially in the wintertime, you're priced too high. Simple as that, even with great pictures. Or you're going to have to push, you're going to have to do more of the effort yourself. But if you have a full-time job, it's like, well, just get it rented as soon as possible. It's better to get it rented at $100, $200 if you rented a whole unit. For Patrick and Noel's case, like that, you guys live in the ADU, correct? Or you rented out there?
No, so it's two different properties. So mine has an ADU. I'll be living in the main house, renting out the ADU, and then Noel is going to be in a different property, renting out by room.
Correct. Yeah. So you guys live in the main house, rent out the ADU. So like the ADU one, if you don't find someone quickly, like don't just hold off, like hold your guns, like, oh, I want the $1,200 a month for that ADU. It's a beautiful, I remember seeing pictures of it. It's beautiful. But pictures, you could get the best photographer, you can get the best description. Most people, for one, only read a few sentences of the description. So don't ever assume don't spend too much time on that. Pictures are more important, and timing is the most important. If you rent in April, May, June, July, August, those are the best months. And that's where aim for all your leases to end in those months. Yep. And you'll get the highest rents when you do have to re-lease and the most interest.
And the last thing, the asterisk right now with COVID is just expect everything's going to take a little bit longer. It might be a little bit less. Like I bought a rental last month. I had some issues with my fourplex change management, and I'm expecting everything. Cool. You know what? I'm just budgeting. Vacancies will be higher. Rents might be a little bit less. Just deal with it. Yeah. It's that micro thing that not to get worried about the big picture. Like, cool, I might lose a few bucks this year, but in the long run, I still win.
yeah, vacancy costs more than $100 less per month in your unit or your space.
That's the biggest takeaway I think as well is I'd rather take the less rent than wait and maybe you takes a month to fill it. And that could be, well, for my case, a little different. I'm dealing with vacancy in Omaha. So I have a W-2 job. I can't just fly out there and get it filled. I have to pay for someone to do it. So I currently am at below market, and I'd rather have it below market with current good tenants I have in it versus kick it up $100 a month.
Yeah.
And then have them then now that's kind of what the situation I'm currently in right now is trying to keep the tenants that pay on time, have automatic payments, take care of it, put up the Christmas lights at Christmas. They enjoy it. And so what if it's 100, 150 below market value? It's the peace of mind, and you can't put a price to peace of mind knowing that every month you don't have to worry about rent coming in. It's automatically set up on automatic payments, and that they're taking care of the place. And if something does come up, they'll let you know right away.
Yes. Yeah, good tenants, I guess from my lessons learned from all my tenants is maximizing rents is great, and you should aim for that every time you have a vacancy. But a good tenant, if you're getting a little bit less or, maybe not what you have in your pro forma, that's totally fine, because it's a long game we're all playing here, and eventually they will move out. Most tenants, I don't know what the number is on that. Maybe Chris knows or has a property manager can find like the average stay for tenants.
It really depends on like the asset class and the tenant quality. Like, a lot of times I know a lot of people like, they say I want to buy like a really nice home and like the suburbs are a place they want to live. A lot of times those are tenants like they're in and out in a year because they're moving here, and then they've got the ability to go out there and buy a home. So, hey, they'll move here for a year, it's on a year lease, and then they buy homes. So they're in and out a year. And if that's a $500,000 house in Littleton, that's some bigger turn costs. Now, if you look at like Section 8 government vouchers, I forget the exact amount that Ellie, my PM, told me. I think she said like their average they say is like 4.5 years. So it really depends. Wow. I have no data on room by room rental, so maybe you can start collecting that.
I give my average. It's about, even though I usually start with 6-month leases, a lot of them stay longer. But yeah, on average, it's about 8-9 months.
Yeah. So
you have some people stay well over a year, and some people leave after 6 months because they're more transitory rent by room people in general. So that's the reality. So I know when they move. So sometimes I'm okay with having a getting a little bit less in rent, depending on if it's wintertime or fall, winter. And then I know springtime, if they do move, like, okay, sweet, I get $100 extra per month for this one room. And then it equals out in the end, and it's totally that's just part of it. You're gonna have vacancies, and the key thing for everything, all this is, if you're gonna self-manage it, is having a really good screening process and picking out great tenants, and it'll make your lives a lot easier. And you could probably handle a lot more properties than you realize until you need a full-time property manager, if you like dealing with people.
Because we're all in the people business, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, random question here. Patrick, we were emailing back and forth a few weeks ago, the AirDNA report, which is like a comping tool for Airbnb short-term rental reports. Are you guys leaning towards short-term rental or long-term rental for the ADU?
So it's Lakewood, so you technically can't do short-term for the ADU. So we're looking at doing medium-term, so 30 plus day. And so far, the other night, sat down, wrote the description, got it all set up, and there's currently one person who is already set up to come in like November 15th for 32 days. So hopefully that continues to work out. Nice. Yeah.
What's the rent you have it at, if you don't mind sharing?
Noelle was fiddling with the numbers on that one, so she could probably speak better to it.
Yeah, we have it on like the flex rate for Airbnb, so it's anywhere from $49 to $55 a night, which roughly comes out to $1,500 to like almost $1,800 for a month, basically.
Damn, that's great.
Yeah.
And do you have it listed as like for 2 people? Is it like what do you have to do, like a futon in there, or actually do a full bed?
We're going to do a queen size bed. It'll be fully furnished with everything, which will be nice. And then we're also allowing pets because it's on a big piece of acreage. So I think that's also a helpful draw. Our hope is that with the medium term, with those people that are coming in who can buy a house or are traveling nurses, they need 1 to 2 months. So we don't mind that turnover. We're actually hoping to have that turnover just so that we can have people in for the shorter time period, get a little bit more cash for that time period, and then find Groupons for cleaning until we find a good service that we like.
So you just gave me, or that made me think of a random idea for you and maybe Ben and other people out there. But we have, always a handful of clients moving out of state here to Colorado. And I often advise people, like, hey, don't buy sight unseen for house hack. Like, come out and rent for a bit. Maybe doing medium-term rentals or sticking in with one of you guys might be a good idea.
That'd be great. Send them our way.
It spots my mind. I don't know why I didn't think about that like 5 years ago. But I'm like, hey, just come rent. Buy a place, do that, but get the boots on the ground because the market moves fast. Learn here. Like I like people generally like to move here first. Mm-hmm. More often than I'd say about 80% of our clients do that are out of state. The other 20% they're good with doing the side or in the long distance. But we should talk about that offline.
That's an excellent idea. My mind's
yeah.
I like that.
Good. Cool. Well, I know we are just over an hour, which is a little bit longer than we had time slot for. Any last minute questions, thoughts, anything anyone out there wants to throw in there?
I know the last topic was mine. So selfishly, I just want to throw it out there because I know that it has seemed that women have a harder time getting into house hacking based on the amount of men I'm surrounded by right now and what I'm hearing from Kevin and also Jeff. It was a struggle for me to figure out dream home, which I had always envisioned my first home still being one I wanted to live in versus what a rental home is. So I just want to throw it out there that if you guys do have questions or if anyone listening has questions, I'm happy to open my, wisdom and knowledge to you of how I got past that.
Well, share it for a few minutes. We always got time for that. Give it. And I have to, because I think, can't remember if it was the first time we met, but this was, it might have been the second time, but your evolution is very interesting as we've been talking about this because I can't remember, for some reason, I went and stopped by Patrick's house hack in Lakewood. I think I was thinking to drop off some of those tools. He was gone on this is Saturday morning, and there you are, like, putting the blue painting tape down, getting ready to paint for the weekend. Well, I don't know, Patrick is, I'm sure, like, on like a 40-hour like bachelor booze cruise, having the time of his life, right, Patrick? Maybe not quite that. We're for house hacking, but you were like a really good partner for house hacking because that was an interesting evolution. You were doing that. At what point did that sell you on house hacking and all that? Because that's just one of my is that the first time we met? I think it was.
That was the first time we met, and I was still hesitant at that point, to be completely honest. I hadn't seen the house that Patrick had bought, and I was a little upset about it because he had asked me to move in, and I was like, I'm moving into a house I've never seen. What if I don't like it? And it wasn't my dream home. So I was like, oh my gosh, like there's a chain link fence around this house. Ew, like I don't like that. It's not updated. Ew, like the doors don't have any trim. Ew. But when he explained it to me and talked about, I know. And then when we talked about the numbers and when he told me how much I would have to pay him in rent, I was like, oh, okay, tell me more. This might work. But yeah, so the journey was interesting because honestly, I think this first house hack really helped open my eyes to how beneficial it could be. And like I said, my entire savings for the down payment that I'm putting on, and I scraped using an FHA because it was a struggle to get a house with an FHA loan in the current market. And I wouldn't have had that down payment if it weren't for being able to have the savings in this house. And I think that was a big turning point for me because, you know, we're sharing the place with someone else. We can hear noises through the vent, sometimes scents that we don't love. But at the end of the day, it doesn't ruin our sanity enough to overcompensate for financially what we're gaining and how we can move forward. Patrick did a ton of work in this house though, so we have learned a lot, and I think that's opened our eyes for ones moving forward as well, as what we can do together as a team in terms of updating and fixing things and what we're not willing to do.
All right. So what other, because this is always good because I get this conversation a lot too. I mean, Ben, we've talked about this.
Yeah.
What are the last minute tips you can give to boyfriends and husbands listening to this to talk to their significant others or to women directly? Do the sales pitch.
Oh goodness, I wasn't prepared for the sales pitch.
No, this is not a sales pitch. It's just all about, before you even start communication, identifying whose role is what, and knowing that you have an end in mind and you have something in mind. And for us, we knew it was an investment, but we did put our blood, sweat, and tears into it because we remodeled it, and it's an Airbnb, and Allison is excellent at decorating and furnishing. So we do have that attachment to it, but it was because we put all of our work, I'm sure, just like, because you guys said you did a lot of work on it, but it's all about knowing what your guys' goals are and having the end in mind and just communicating, because it can in the middle of summer when you're trying to remodel a bathroom without AC, it can get tough, but it's worth it. It's 100% worth it. And I wish Allison was here to chime in on it because she'd have a lot better things to say.
No, but you're right. It's about knowing that what you are working towards in the future. I'm also a project manager. For me, I want to know, like, okay, we're doing this because in 10 years, this is what it gets us. So to your point, it's, having that common goal in mind and knowing what you guys want out of your future, and being able to express how the house hacking helps you get to that point, even if there's a couple struggles along the way. And it's the difference of being able to get there in 5 years versus 30 years.
Yeah, and going back to the communication and understanding whose role is. For example, we have an Airbnb. Allison does all the communication because she's very good at putting together charming, good messages to guests, where otherwise I would just say, welcome, hi, here's a passcode. And it would, and then that's where we've just identified what our strengths are and what our weaknesses is, and making a good team, because that's what you are, is you're a team, right?
Yeah, I've done it with my partner too, and I think that's the key thing, is you have to persuade them that it's a team effort. It's not just only for yourself, it's for both of you. And that's where the dynamic changes, where we all have our strengths and weaknesses, but if you do it together, you kind of have that shared goal in mind, and then you're both are fully committed and want to aim for that and accomplish it and get to that end goal, whatever that goal is for each of you. And that's probably sometimes tougher, but if you find a partner that my partner's cool, because she Suleika, she does a little bit. She doesn't mind it. She actually is more handy than I am. I don't want to change the light bulb. The only thing I want to do is like paint, and that's really it. And I'm not even really good at that, but I just say I am. But she'll do everything. She'll literally put tile down. She'll like put baseboards. She'll work for like 8 hours straight, and then like outside pulling weeds. And I'm complaining after 5 minutes I'm too hot, and that's what makes us great. It's like I still help, of course, but she's all in, and that's sometimes
That's cool.
Sometimes hard to find because you don't really know someone. Well, I didn't know she was going to be like that, but if you find that, cherish that, because that's a very rare trait, and the better you treat your lady, you'll accomplish your goals a lot faster. Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, everyone, thanks for hopping on here. I enjoyed it. I can't wait till we do this stuff in person again. But we'll be seeing a lot of these guests on future podcasts, talking specifically about their own house hacks. That's one of the goals I have, to start bringing more people, talk more nuances on their deals. And if you guys have questions out there, reach out to me, reach out to anyone on the podcast episode here, the Mastermind. This is a great way to network, learn, share ideas, because it does help everyone reach their goals. And I have my strengths. I ask Jeff a lot of times for questions. I ask Ben. I ask other people. You all help each other out, and ends up getting everyone to the finish line. So everyone, thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
It was fun.
Thank you.
Great
Thanks.
time.
Thanks.
For having us.